I have two very distinguished speakers for this afternoon. They're from England. Welcome again. Our first speaker is Tim Phillips. He's from London, as we have told already. And he is going to give us the paper titled Inkjet Applications and Market Development.
So a little bit about my company. So we have two companies. IMI Europe organises conferences and courses. So conferences a little bit like this one, but also courses where people come along to learn more about specific aspects of the technology. We run those courses all over Europe and also in some cases in Asia as well. So we've run events in Japan and we've run events in India this year. So those kind of things. And then there's a consulting company which is really just me, but that's a marketing consultancy, so helping companies take their technology to a market and make it into a profitable business. So that's the introduction. Just before we carry on, a few of our events. So the courses that I mentioned. It is working, but you can only see it over there. So the top one, Inkjet Winter Workshop, and the Inkjet Summer School, the third one down, they're the courses. So you can see some examples of the kind of things that the courses cover. So things like single-pass inkjet system design, ink characterization, things like this. And then we have really two conferences. One of them is more of a technical conference, and the one at the bottom that happens later in the year, it's just happened this year. In late September, is more of a strategic level, looking at where the industry is going and what people are doing. So those are the kind of events that we do each year. So outlining my talk, I'm going to look at three markets, as I said. I'm going to look at packaging, decor, so interior decoration, printing, and textiles, and then have a summary. So moving into packaging, so digital printing and packaging has been around for quite a few years now. There's very clear advantages in some cases to being able to print packaging digitally, being able to personalise things, being able to regionalise them, being able to do special promotions and editions for specific times of year, for example, all these kinds of things, and also being able to do new things with packaging that you haven't been able to do before. Most of that digitally printed packaging has been done with toner-based technology, and actually with the HP Indigo technology, but there are lots of possibilities for inkjet-based systems, and these are just starting to make some inroads into the market, although it's been a long time since people started talking about it. So just to give you an idea, the packaging market is a very big market. Even just printing of packaging is a very, very valuable market. So that slide has some numbers on it, but that's also supposed to indicate that the packaging market isn't just one market if you think of it in terms of market dynamics, but also in terms of technology. The technology of a printer to print onto labels is completely different to the technology that you need to print onto a can that's already been made into a cylindrical shape, for example. So clearly they have different requirements as well. Market trends, so as we said, there is a very strong pull from the packaging industry, from the brands themselves, the ones who are paying for the packaging to be printed for them, generally speaking, for all of the reasons that are mentioned there. Being able to do things, aim things at different parts of the demographic, have things aimed at young customers and older customers, for example, have things that are regional specific, have things that are very, very timely, so around a particular event that's happening just one day and then it's gone away again. So any packaging that you printed for that event and don't use, it's now useless. So being able to print that packaging on demand is very useful. Being able to cut down the amount of wastage is also very important. There are various other things as well. And environment is extremely important in these issues. We've had a huge amount of interest, controversy around the amount of plastic that's ending up in our oceans and other places in the environment. So if we can reduce the amount of wastage in the packaging world by using newer printing technology, then that's making a contribution to reducing some of these problems, though it doesn't solve it by any means. So these are the kind of things that brands are doing versioning, innovating packaging. There's lots of examples recently of companies that are specifically personalising packaging, so printing people's names on packaging, cans of Coke with a range of names on it. You can, if you see your own name, you can pick it out. Things that you can order off the internet that have got personalised messaging printed onto the packaging, specifically for gifts for people and things like that. These are the kind of things that you can only do with digital technology. And as it says there, one of the biggest brands in the world, or the biggest companies in the world, owning lots of the biggest brands in the world, Procter & Gamble, digital is the future for packaging. Everyone knows it's the future. The question is, when will it be the future, and you know, what form it will take, and things like that. But it's clearly something that is happening. These are just some estimates, so these are kind of numbers to take away if they're of interest to you. The value of the market, the amount of it that's done by, so EP is electrophotography or toner based technologies, as I mentioned earlier. IJ is obviously inkjet. So the kinds of places where printed value is starting to show real numbers from inkjet, there you can see, and some others where there's lots more to be done. So for example, in flexible packaging, there is essentially zero printed with inkjet currently. So requirements and challenges. You have to have a suitable printing system, clearly, and that I mentioned that this is very specific to the different types of markets. So for flexible packaging, it tends to be a reasonably wide, usually this kind of width, able to print very fast, able to print with extremely high quality, multiple colours, preferably things like metallics as well, preferably white overcoats, all those sorts of things. Corrugated is a different kind of material, so it needs different kind of handling, but some of the printing requirements are quite similar. And then you have, like I said, things like cartons, which already have a three-dimensional shape, and cans and bottles, things like that. There you have to have specific motion systems that will pick up the shapes, rotate them in such a way that you can print on them, and then pass them on and do that as quickly as possible. But the other important things are speed and reliability tied up together so that you can produce a large amount of packaging. People are used to very fast conventional printers. They find very slow digital printers a bit of a turn-off, even if they are digital. And the other thing that's a huge issue in the packaging world is colour consistency. Being able to produce brand colours is very important to the brands. And no matter how many times they get shown that even conventional printing doesn't produce their colours consistently anyway, they're still looking for very high levels of colour consistency. And the industry needs to be able to demonstrate that to the packaging world in order to get adopted. Media compatibility, so being able to print onto the substrates that people already use, the paper or the polymer film that the companies are already using in their printing, is quite important. So ideally we don't need to put extra overcoats down, add to the cost of the substrate even before we put the more expensive ink on. That's the ideal situation, and that leads me to the other one on there, which is the printed cost. And in the case of digital, as people who are involved in digital printing know, essentially ink cost is the main driver of printed cost in digital printing, whereas it isn't really in conventional printing. There are lots of other contributing factors. In digital printing, ink cost is the major cost of printing, and that's why there is always focus on that from customers. How much is your ink? Why is it so expensive? Why can't you make it cheaper? These kinds of things. That's one that needs to be looked at, needs to be understood, and needs to be part of the dialogue between the technology providers and the users in order to gain adoption. And food safety obviously only an issue for food packaging, but in food packaging it really is an issue, and it's an unsolved issue. Concerns about ink components especially leaching into materials and through materials and getting into the food is a big concern, and it's a very time-consuming and expensive process to go through to qualify a printing process for food packaging and ensure that it's completely safe. And there are lots of areas of technology that are being looked at for that, which we'll come back to. And defects. The packaging industry is extremely stringent in terms of its requirements for image quality. They're used to the very highest standard of printing from conventional printers, and they won't accept any reduction in that quality in order to get the benefits of digital printing. So we really have to look at the ultimate print quality from digital systems, and that's really an ink thing, a system thing, a software thing, all of those things working together. So innovations in the technology that are leading towards this market, and some other ones that we'll look at. Printheads is one of them. So one of the things that very fast, very wide printers need is very high resolution, fast printheads, preferably also very reliable and stable. Most of the printhead manufacturers in the last few years have introduced new technology based on silicon MEMS manufacturing techniques. So they're building printheads in a much more modern way, if you like, than they used to be. Instead of a bit of a cottage industry way of building the printheads. Look away, everybody who makes printheads, it's obviously more complicated than that. But using silicon processing technology means that you can, in principle, make very high resolution printheads. You can define features very closely, as you can in silicon manufacturing. You're making it out of a fundamentally inert material. Silicon's actually very good for chemical compatibility. Things like nozzle straightness tend to be very good from this kind of manufacturing. And ultimately, it's a low cost per nozzle, and therefore cost per printer, when you add them all together, way of manufacturing printheads. We're starting to see those printheads. The Fujifilm Dematic Samba printhead, for example, is being quite widely adopted now, and most of the manufacturers, including some of the ones mentioned on here, have introduced printheads based on that technology in the last few years. Single pass printing, so this is where you have a large number of nozzles spread across the whole width of what you're printing, and you print without moving the nozzles, just moving the substrate. That's in contrast to the scanning printing that, for example, is the way the desktop printers work. So this is the fastest way to print with inkjet printing. It gives you the fastest theoretical speed it's possible to get out of inkjet printing nozzles. The downside of it is, firstly, you need a lot of nozzles to do it, and therefore a lot of printheads. So there's a high printhead cost and a high replacement cost for printheads. It's also a high risk strategy for printing, because it turns out to be quite difficult to hide missing nozzles, and anyone who's even used an inkjet printer knows that missing nozzles goes with inkjet printing. At some point, not all of your nozzles will be working, and if you've got literally millions of nozzles in your printer, the chances of having a few not working is essentially one. There will always be some not working, so how do you deal with that? Is something that all of the manufacturers looking at single pass printing have to come up with a solution for, because otherwise you have a printer that's really not usable. So there are some examples here. This machine, a company in the UK, Inca, which is owned by Screen, they formed a partnership with BHS, which is a German packaging company, to produce a very large, very fast, single-pass corrugated packaging machine. And they've been working on it for a few years. They have a prototype machine, like a smaller version of the final machine, running, and it runs at offset printing speed. It's extremely fast, so it's looking very promising. And a lot of the other big digital OEMs are also announcing or have placed in a small number of companies, single pass, high-speed, packaging-based printers, like the ones you can see here. So I mentioned missing nozzles and print quality. So clearly a lot of what you need to do there is around the print head and around how the ink works in the print head. But assuming that you're working on that, you can actually help yourself a lot by using clever software to detect problems early and to compensate for them without necessarily having to stop and recover the nozzles that aren't working. So, for example, these are just a couple of examples of using software to, the top example is reducing the variability between the print heads, and that can change with time, so being able to compensate for that automatically and turn that kind of stripy image into the less stripy one on the right. And then missing nozzle compensation, so you can see between those two dotting pictures, the idea is that the printer detects that a nozzle is missing and increases the drop size of the nozzles either side of that printer so that it starts to hide the white line that you see from a single missing nozzle. And that kind of technique is used quite successfully as long as you have that control. Firstly, you need to be able to detect that the lines are missing, and then you need to be able to control the nozzles on a nozzle-by-nozzle basis in order to apply the correction algorithm. But these are the kind of things that can be done and are being done. And then we mentioned food safety, and one of the issues there is around using UV curable inks. And UV curable inks are very advantageous in digital printing for a number of reasons. They tend to mean that you can print very fast, you can dry very quickly, they tend to be very reliable in terms of the missing nozzle problem that I mentioned before. But one of the issues is that if you can't guarantee that you can completely cure the UV curable ink and turn it from the liquid into the solid form with all of the chemicals trapped inside it, there is a food compatibility question around it, particularly around some of the materials that you have to put into UV curable ink to catalyse the curing process. And one possible way of addressing this issue is by using electron beam curing. So you use a high power electron beam instead of UV light. The advantage of that is that you don't need to put the UV photoinitiators into the ink. It cures to a high depth automatically, essentially, and full cure is actually very easy to achieve with UV. The disadvantage is they tend to have a high capital cost, a high initial cost to go with them, but people are working on that with compact, high technology, cheaper sources and things like that. So that's another promising area of technology. So that's the kind of packaging section. I'm going to look at decor and then textiles in a similar way. So in decor, so here what we're looking at is printing the paper that is then laminated into a board and gives you all of the kind of wood effect furnishings that people have in their homes nowadays instead of real wood. So it's a kind of a strange market where what you're doing is trying to get the highest quality fake wood that you can. So the way you do that is you need to print paper, you need to print it very wide. They tend to be 2.5 meters wide, these printers. We need to print it very cheaply because, again, the existing technology prints it very cheaply. But if we can do that, there are some advantages from doing it digitally. Not quite the same examples as packaging, because probably you don't want to personalise your floor and print your name on it or anything like that. That would be a bit of a strange thing to do, possibly. But what the decor manufacturers really like to be able to do is broaden their portfolio of designs. So instead of having 5 or 6 different wood effects, if they could have 50, but be able to produce that with the same cost structure, they would love that, because there are more opportunities to entice somebody to buy your products versus somebody else's. So, but that means that the quantity of each design that they want to print is much, much less than it is currently. And so a digital technology is kind of ideal for doing that. So again, we need a reliable machine. We need a single pass machine again, and these are very wide. A 2.5 meter wide single pass machine has a lot of print heads in it. So this is going to be an expensive machine. We need to make sure that the printing that we do with the new technology is compatible with this lamination process, which is actually a very, very complex process, and it's very dependent on the chemistry of everything that's involved. So, and again, there's a lengthy process involved in ensuring that what you insert into the process instead of conventional printing will actually work in the lamination process again. And again, ink cost comes back. Every digital conversation that anyone's ever had with people that are used to conventional printing, most of the time you're talking about ink cost, inevitably. The printing market, sorry about that slide getting a bit funny. Just again, some numbers, it's again a large market, hundreds of billions of dollars. It is actually growing, and obviously you tend to find in these markets that even if the overall market is static, there are lots of growth opportunities for digital technology, essentially stealing the market from conventional printing. So you can see there how it's divided regionally. It's actually there's a lot of it going on all over the world. And so this is potentially a very attractive market, and a lot of the technology developers and suppliers in the inkjet world are very interested in the decor market for these reasons. You can see there again, decor doesn't just include the things I mentioned, printing wood effects. We can also look at other things. There are all sorts of things here that basically include printing paper as part of a laminate, but there are also other, you can expand what you might call interior decoration into printing furnishings, printing things for curtains, for lampshades, all those sorts of things. But essentially, the printed laminate market is what I'm discussing here. And this is trying to make that point about why digital is useful even in a market where you're not going to buy new flooring every year or every 6 months like you do with textiles perhaps. If you're wanting to produce this large number of designs, it means that the quantity of each design that's made is significantly lower. You can see the example here at the bottom. The idea here is it's a 24-hour period. The red periods are periods where the printer is being set up to do the next print run, and the periods where you can see a wood design is where it's actually printing a wood design. So in a more conventional situation, like it used to be in the good old days, the decor printers would say, you can have a 24-hour period, and more than half of the time, it's kind of the way it works out, you're actually printing paper that you can then sell on to be made into fake wood. But if you reduce the run sizes by a factor of 10, the red bits don't change, but if you reduce each one of those print runs to a half, a quarter, down to a tenth of what it was previously, you can see that in that situation, the vast majority of your time, your printer is not printing. Your printer is being used to change inks, change drums, do all those things, all of the things that don't make you money. So that's really the reason for going towards a digital system, and then you get a timeline like the one at the top, where your run lengths, your print lengths are much shorter, but the setup time is much shorter as well. So you still have a printer that's being used for most of the time. Actually, even if it's printing significantly slower than the printer at the bottom, it's still a more useful printer, a more productive printer under those situations than your conventional reviewer-based printer would be. And those are really the reasons behind adopting digital if you're a decor printer. So I think for most people involved in digital, they're pretty familiar things, so I won't go into them. These are some of the...
No, it's not. Excuse me.
I wouldn't want that noise.
No, 5 minutes more.
Okay. So these are some of the people who make digital solutions for this industry. Inks are very important in the decor world, and as we said, they need to be reliable, they need to be compatible with the lamination process, and they tend to be aqueous pigment-based inks. So I'm just going to move on to the... Oh, I'm already on to the... Hang on a minute, sorry. So, textiles. Should be an introductory slide there. So this is the textile market, the third one of the markets that we're going to look at. And you can see there again some figures around the size of the market. And again, it's a very large market. We know that Turkey is a significant player in the market, as we'll see in a couple of slides' time. And the key facts are that it is still growing, especially if you're involved in the digital side of textile printing. It's growing very healthily. In almost all markets across the world, and also because the market is so big, it would appear that there are many more years of healthy growth to come in this area. Top exporters of printed textiles you can see listed on the left, including Turkey, and also we know that Turkey is a key apparel producer as well, and so on the list on the right, it's also a top exporter of completed clothing. But you can see some of the other key countries there as well. Trends fueling growth, again, these are kind of similar. It's trends towards personalisation of giving customers more of what they would like to have versus what other people are telling them they want. So we're seeing these kind of effects. I think Marcus is going to talk some more about these kind of trends, so I'll skip past this bit and leave that to you because you love this stuff, don't you?
It's better because you have 2 minutes.
Especially because I have 2 minutes more. So, so we can see here key textile printing markets: China, Italy, Turkey, India, and the USA. So those are the biggest textile printing markets in the world, very significant producers of digitally printed textiles. I'm going to skip a couple of slides because I'm running out of time. High growth markets, and we can see there's been a trend recently that Southeast Asia has become a very high growth market. As some of the other markets get higher in cost, like China, things are moving towards Southeast Asia as high growth areas. So you can see lots of those countries there. Flip through that. We're also seeing a lot of growth in signage printing, so printing textiles to use for advertising rather than to use for making clothing out of. That's a very significant market as well, as you can see there, and it's particularly significant in North America as a matter of interest. Again, you can see growing markets here. The key ones again, and some of the other ones that I've mentioned before in the Southeast Asia area. We'll skip past Asia. Again, single pass printing is very important, or becoming more important in textiles. Question mark about how significant it's going to be, how many people actually have enough production to justify the single pass printers in this case, which are very expensive machines. MS have a number installed around the world. Most of those other ones were announced in 2015, and relatively small numbers of them are currently in use. And again, just looking at a little bit of technology, just with my final couple of slides. This is an example of sort of thinking outside the box, really. A few companies are using an inkjet printer not to print onto a woven textile, but printing onto a single thread, either before it's woven or before it's embroidered to make part of textile. So you can see these examples here, where they're all created with a single thread, where its colour is being changed by printing ink onto it, while it's being incorporated into the embroidery process. So instead of, it's a bit like the situation with conventional printing, which has a set number of colours, and digital printing, which essentially has as many colours as you want because you mix them together. This is kind of like it. An embroidery machine has a certain number of spindles that you can have different coloured threads on, let's say 12 or 20. So your design is made up out of 12 maximum or 20 maximum colours. With this system, you can have any colour in the rainbow that you want. So there are some quite fascinating possibilities in that area if you like embroidery. So in summary, there are still excellent growth opportunities in these markets. The packaging and decor are really still very new markets for inkjet printing. Textiles, we were saying that 5 or 6 years ago. It's now almost an established market for digital printing, but there are still many, many years of growth to come. We're understanding as an industry, we're understanding better how these markets work, I think, although there's still some question marks about that in some cases. There's lots of new technology being worked on, and in many cases these have applicability to the cases that I've mentioned, and so they're quite interesting in terms of what they can do. And so I would say this, but I think it's a very exciting future for the industry in these markets and in others. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Taki, and the Lucky team and the organising team here for inviting myself. I have to say, I think this is the most majestic room I've ever presented in, and of course a great initiative to bring together people to focus on new technologies, and I commend you for the focus really on converting to digital. So my talk is around industrial inkjet, which is a digital process. I've called the title Industrial Inkjet 2.0. Initially it was moving on to another level, but I've moved it on a bit, so I'm going to kind of challenge everyone to think, is it crossing the chasm or is it stuck in a ravine? And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what that means in technology terms, but also in terms of new markets and the challenges that new technology has when it's entering into very traditional markets that have barriers to entry in them. So I think digital printing generally, but in particular industrial inkjet, really holds the key for many businesses to enter a new market sphere. And I'm going to call this Paradise Island. So if I could challenge you to use your imagination and imagine a beautiful existence where your innovative business doesn't really suffer from huge competition, because the competition can't quite work out why it is you do what you do. And also because of the climate in this place is accepting for constant evolution and so on. Unfortunately, the print industry itself tends to exist in a place called Bloody Island, where the weather is dreadful, very changeable. All the businesses that exist within it can see exactly what you do, and they compete with you on price. So it gives you very little space for manoeuvre, and very little time to really look into the future and enjoy life as it was. So I think digital print is the key to this place. The kind of companies that exist in Paradise Island, companies like Amazon, on a more service-based level, companies like Southwest Airlines, that despite the fact they have the same technology as their competitors, they outperform them by 10 to 1. Because their culture and the way they do things is so significantly different, and the competition can't quite work out why it is they do what they do. So anyway, onwards. The biggest barrier to change is the human emotion of fear, and fear triggers chemicals that's about defending ourselves and preventing change happening, which is quite useful when we're being attacked by a tiger or a saber-toothed tiger, but actually in business terms it's pretty unhelpful. It means that we continue to stay as we are and focus on incremental improvements that, frankly speaking, our customers don't even notice. So it's a strange thing, but fear really killed more dreams than actually I think failure ever will. We have a big fear of failure in our culture. We're being judged all of the time, and we feel we are. We need to break through that kind of wall of fear. So my outline for the talk really is going to challenge us to break through that wall of fear. I'm going to look at innovation and what it means and how we can utilise it. I will use some surveys results. I'm one of the co-founders of the InPrint show, so InPrint is about new technologies for industrial printing, so we're always looking at where the market's changing. I'm going to look at the tipping point, because if we're going to be leaders and we're going to transform our own businesses, it's not just about having the right technology, it's about actually creating our own tipping points. And then I'm going to look at the importance, I think, of storytelling. Because I think printing and the print industry generally is dreadful at storytelling. I think storytelling is how humans are hardwired. So if we can improve that, we have a chance to really effect positive change. So what is industrial inkjet or industrial print? We define industrial print as this kind of printing, printing that's used within everyday life. So not printing on paper or printing on posters, printing onto floors, ceilings, onto smartphones, in cars and so on. So it's printing that is part of the process of manufacturing. It could be functional printing, it could be decorative printing, it could be packaging. And all, as I said earlier, all new technologies have to go through a cycle of adoption, and you may well be familiar with this technology adoption life cycle. Originally I think it was Rogers, and then the book I read, which is a marketing book called Crossing the Chasm, which is the theme of this, is about how different sections of the market take to your new idea and your new technology. And we see this in every single market. You have a group at the front, and the innovators, and the early adopters who tend to be open-minded, tend to be reasonably comfortable with change, and tolerant of things not being 100% correct all of the time. And we call this bit here the early market, and Moore calls this bit the early market. It's real, and money is spent, but it's not mainstream. It's not where you actually see a market radically change. It's the early part of the market. Then Moore says, in order for things to become mainstream, you need to cross this chasm, or this gap, between the two land masses, I guess. A bit like maybe the different sides of the phosphorus or the phosphorus. The early majority, however, and the early adopters are significantly different people, and that's really the challenge. So what are early adopters like? Well, they themselves see the value of these new ideas, and they see the opportunities of them, and they're dynamic people. And this is important because if you have a new idea or a new technology, you do need to find these people, because they provide you with feedback, they provide you with evidence and experience that your technology and your idea is working. They actually expect radical discontinuity, so they're kind of revolutionaries. They're the kind of people you meet, you wish everybody was like that if you have a new technology. And they are tolerant of imperfection, so they're happy to work in collaboration with you to solve a problem. So they're really important people, but then they don't represent the full market. The difference with the early adopters and the early majority, or the pragmatists, is that the early majority actually, they don't want revolution. They kind of accept change, but they want it to exist within the structure they know and feel comfortable with. So they're kind of risk averse. They're not sort of navel-gazing, looking backwards, but they do want the risk removed from their decision. So they want minimal discontinuity with the old ways. They're actually intolerant of imperfection, so it has to be really, really perfect. And they need evidence from the wider market that the new technology works. And the problem with particularly industrial inkjet that we're seeing with new into some of the markets Tim has been talking about, is that they are highly secretive, and many people are signing NDAs, which means there's hardly any evidence of success. People are saying, oh yes, it's happening, and there's examples of it, but because of this secrecy, the early majority can't see evidence of it, and that holds back fast change. But nevertheless, I think we've almost become a society where radical change is what we expect and want, and actually we've become impatient. And I think actually in a healthy business context we need to be patient, we need to be pragmatic, and we need to work with these things to create a healthy business rather than a business that changes too quickly and actually quickly becomes a bloody island type market. So ideas are important, but let's be honest, humankind sometimes invents ideas that are really bad, like this idea here. This is an idea that protects your hair from noodles, or protects your noodles from hair, one of the two. Lo and behold, this idea didn't catch on into being a mainstream idea. Nor did this contraption here, that's obviously looked incredibly stylish in its time, whereas now we've passed the health and safety audits. Nor did this TV goggles. Again, some of these, the point I'm making is that not all ideas are good ideas. And I guess the process of taking a new idea to market is you get to discover whether your idea has any value at all. And this one is my favourite. It's called a goldfish walker. You can take your pet goldfish for a walk. Why not? Again, silly ideas that didn't even move to early market. Then there are some ideas that were expected to become like mega and transform, and QR codes, I'd safely say, I think we're early market. I also think about books were going to become redundant, weren't they, with the e-reader, and actually books have come back and e-readers have gone back down. Digital signage was going to replace posters, but that hasn't really happened either. So sometimes things don't really progress beyond what we call the early market. Sometimes it's timing. So this is a Sinclair C5 car, which is electric, and it came out at a point where it was probably far too early, and people weren't really accepting of the look of it. I know which one I prefer, and the timing now is obviously completely different, and the look and feel is right for right now. So sometimes it's timing. And other times you see products now and then that they don't really catch on, because frankly speaking, people look a bit silly. Google Glass, again, another example of an early market product that didn't really move beyond that. Sometimes pioneers invent stuff as well, which seems really unfair, but no one has I would imagine nobody knows who that is. And that's Martin Cooper. He invented the mobile phone. And this guy here, he worked for a big company we're all aware of, a famous company, but didn't get buy-in internally, and the digital camera invention was taken up by the companies. This chap's called Steve Sasson. So sometimes it's not all, you don't get people like the silly Steve Jobs. Sometimes the pioneers don't get to be famous either. But growth predictions in industrial printing, bringing you back to industrial print, have always been phenomenally positive. So every single year we ask our community, so the developing community, the people that are heavily invested in the technology, so of course there's a level to which their positivity needs to be kind of factored in. But nonetheless, it's always been positive, but we can see an up-down tick since 2015 with a resurgence. Now, and it got me thinking about things and adoption, and why some ideas happen and others don't, and that all technologies and new ideas go through a process or a hype cycle, and the Gartner hype cycles are worth checking out if you're not familiar with it. It's quite interesting. The gentleman earlier talking about AI, I think we personally think that's in a massive hype phase at the moment. Well, the principle is simple. You introduce a new idea and it goes up the hype cycle, the technology trigger, and they call it the peak of inflated expectations. And I think 3D printing did this. Everybody was talking about 3D printing. We were going to 3D print everything. Every news article was 3D printing. And then it fell off a cliff. And it went down the trough of disillusionment, and arguably is finding its place. I think with the industrial inkjet we saw this too, moving up that kind of peak of inflated expectations, and because it's more challenging than people expected for a number of reasons, it then kind of And also people fell in love with the possibilities, you know, the flexibility it gives, the freedom it gives designers, I think is astounding. I mean, you know, designers for years have been limited by Apple, because if you're designing something and you have to print a huge amount of it, you're going to look a bit silly if no one buys the stock, you know. Whereas Inkjet really liberates design. All of these things, and because of the digital culture we live in, and the speed of change, people assume that manufacturing is going to switch very quickly, and it's just highly unrealistic. It's a highly complex, interlinked, conservative, huge market that isn't disposed to fast change. So we needed a reality check, really, and I think we got that. With Inkjet, it didn't move as quickly as we'd have perhaps all thought it was going to initially, and it did go down to this trough of disillusionment. It's experienced growing pains, and I'm telling you the truth here, because we all hear the wonderful things about digital. Let's have a reality check. There are cultural barriers to change. There are lots of traditional industries where Inkjet's incredibly inconvenient, frankly. If you're in the production world, you're an expert. Why would you want this annoying technology to remove your status? You're not going to want it. We get people coming to our corrugated show, not because they want to buy the new technology, but because they want evidence not to change. That's a key reason for them attending. This is the challenge in front of us, ladies and gentlemen. But within the developing community, there is also other things, like digital is perceived as a replacement technology. Well, in many of the manufacturing markets, it simply won't be. And why should it be? It should add value. And it can add value, because it can do things that analog can't do. And that's where the value is. The value still is to be found in many of these markets. There's also a bit of a lack of true investment from some of the big companies, because everybody's waiting to see which is the next big market. Is it packaging? Is it decor? Is it... Well, let's wait and see. That's holding back change. There needs to be more collaboration. There's a bunch of challenges and growing pains. And that's just a reality check. There's a lot of M&A. There's a lot of companies buying other companies. Because the smaller companies have the great technology and the bigger companies have the money. So there's a lot of that going on. And that's normal, but it shows that there's lots of interest in industrial inkjet. And slowly but surely, though, since 2014 to now, it's moving back up this trough of disillusionment, because people are becoming more tolerant, but also more informed, and the technology slowly but surely is getting better and better and better. And Tim's outlined some of those very well in his presentation, so I won't mention that again. But the technology, going back to some ideas are bad, Inkjet is a fantastic idea, and it's just a matter of time. But anyway, if you take the technology adoption cycle and the hype cycle and lay one on top of the other, I think it's fair to say we're right at the point before the early majority. Right where it's coming out that trough of disillusionment, we're just literally crossing the chasm as we speak. And some of the survey results really bear that out, in that we're in a state of fast early development in the market. Still early days. It's still a time where you imagine that this technology is having to play in the pharmaceutical industry, it's having to work in the decor industry, it's having to work really diverse. And these inks don't exist. They're not sitting on the shelf waiting to be used. Chemists and ink companies are being challenged as to what ink they need to produce next, and how engineering moves quicker than maybe chemistry, not because chemists are slow, but because the lack of communication and things like that. Ink chemistry is the biggest hurdle, the biggest challenge, for good reason, because it's the most important component. So we need to be patient, we need to be better at collaborating between our end users, so people at the very end that are making the product with the print on it, and the developing community. So we asked our community, would you agree with the following statement? The challenge ahead for inkjet manufacturing is not only technical but commercial, and without doubt they completely agree with that. And that's really positive. That does show that the market's moved on, but now it's as much of a communication and commercial challenge. I see this problem in traditional printing, Doesn't matter which market, it's a commercial challenge. It isn't a technical one. The technology is there or close to being there. So now it's about becoming better and improving, perhaps as an industry, to really convince these traditional markets to take this risk. The next question, what in your opinion is the single biggest challenge for growth for inkjet? And it is that conservative industry, for people thinking of ways not to change as opposed to thinking of the opportunity of change. Tim highlighted VHS and Inca. That's a rare example, I think, of evidence that something's happening on a significant scale. There just aren't many of those examples because of secrecy. So really a kind of crucial point with industrial inkjet. But how do you really create this tipping point, and what is a tipping point? So Malcolm Gladwell wrote this book years ago. In English terms, it's used a lot about how a craze or a virus or a viral campaign can suddenly become really powerful. So the tipping point is defined as being a moment of critical mass, threshold, or the boiling point. He uses a great example in the American Revolution. There's a particular critical moment in the American Revolution where a guy called Paul Revere overhears in a tavern a couple of British officers talking about an advance they were making the following day to capture Samuel Adams, I think John Hancock, and both of which were really important generals within the American Revolutionary Army. So Paul Revere, what he does is he rides through the night from Boston out into the Massachusetts countryside, informing and warning all of the people there that the British were coming. And the importance of that is it was highly effective because he was highly effective as a networker, as somebody that was trusted within the community. He was a silversmith, he held status, he had a large network of people, and he managed to convince large swathes of the population that the British would come there, and they came out and challenged the British to the point where they failed. Now, this is interesting because there's another guy, and I can't even remember his name, that kind of underlines the point, did a similar thing in a different direction and had completely no success because he had a particular set of characteristics. So what? I don't see many of these kind of people in the digital print world. And if we have people within our businesses, do we have that type of person that can convince others, that is a thought leader, that is committed to networking, that has a network and other people value? Because I think sometimes we don't think about people, we think about technology, and we're now at the point where we need to think much more about people. Because it is a journey, taking our businesses into new places. We'll go off, and I've done this myself, with a new idea, and you have this energy called uninformed optimism, and you really need that. Because if you knew, you wouldn't do anything, so you have to go out and find out yourself. And then you hit a wall of opposition with your new idea. That's normal, yeah? People pick holes in your idea, and actually, on the one hand, it's a bit demotivating, but you do need that because that helps you refine your idea. And you reach number 2, which is like informed pessimism. That's when you start to question whether actually it's worth continuing with your idea. You will inevitably reach number 3, which is crisis of meaning, and that is the point where you either quit. Some ideas, like the goldfish, orca, that would be fine to crash and burn at that point. But inkjet already has so much evidence that it works, it's worth staying with. To number 5, to reach this point of informed pessimism. So some of the other questions we asked is, which sector is the priority for your business for the next 2 years? And this kind of underlines really what Tim was presenting there, in terms of the fact that packaging is really seen as the number 1 marketplace that the developing community is investing time and money in. And it makes sense because packaging is fast moving, packaging can benefit from the production efficiencies of digital, the personalisation value, the localisation value. There's a lot of investment also into direct-to-shape, printing directly onto cylinders for packaging as well. So we can see, based on the previous question, I said we asked what's your priority now, and it's packaging now and in the future in 2 years. as well as decor being an important one. And they are relevant because they're close to consumer behaviour. The further away you get, so functional printing, which is less sensitive to consumer behaviour and more arguably technically difficult, is further away. And we can see that here, that the main two markets really are decor and packaging, and a little bit of direct-to-shape, whereas the functional part is not quite coming to the fore yet, but I believe will do in the future. And that is also underscored by the fact it's hard. Printing into things like smartphones with a technology such as inkjet, it's really difficult if you're printing different types of substance. It's happening, and there are companies in Alchemy and Alchipelago that are developing printing of glues and adhesives, and that's having value, and paints within automotive and in different industries. But it's very challenging to do, very challenging, albeit that it's happening. So storytelling, if it's a commercial challenge as much as a technical one, we need to improve our storytelling, I think. And why is that? Well, I guess we need to ask ourselves a key question. First off, watch the Sinek presentation on TED or Gitti's book. It's a really compelling proposition that people don't buy what you do, but they do buy why you do it. And that's why these amazing businesses like Amazon and Apple and Southwest Airlines get to thrive in highly competitive markets, because they have a clear trigger for both the people that work for them and their customers to understand why it is they do what they do. And it's grounded in biology. So the companies that are perhaps printing companies, you ask them, what do you explain your business? They may explain it in a very practical way, but not a non-emotional one. So why does somebody care enough to buy from you? They will more likely buy from somebody who understands why they do it. And why is important because it's part of how the brain was originally formed. It's far more emotive and emotional and more powerful. The limbic brain, we spend too much time in our practical and sometimes academic world, frankly, focusing on the neocortex. And that's about really revering the status of being experts, but also following rules. And if we can be more emotional about how we define our businesses and have a clear vision and purpose, we're placing our businesses on a high level. Humans are hardwired for stories. It's a bit more biology, because I can see there's a few academics in the audience and they're perhaps questioning that in their mind. Stories trigger chemicals from the brain. That's why stories are so important. That's why we remember stories our grandparents tell us. That's why we remember the campfire moments. Paying attention, cortisol. So if you're making a presentation, it's quite useful if people pay attention. Second one, feeling of empathy. Oxytocin is released from the amygdala. Both of which are incredibly useful. Feeling empathy is about trust. If people can see the world through your eyes, they're more likely to feel in their gut that you're worth trusting. And if you've got a new idea, you're going to need them to trust you, because they're going to think of every single reason not to work with you before they do make the decision to work with you. And of course, storytellers, just looking at the pictures, you'll immediately understand they stand for something because they have a cause, they have a purpose, they've stood for something and they've told their story very well. The book worth getting is The Storyteller's Secret. It's proven that this guy Gallo studied the best storytellers and broke down into 3 sections the amount of time they spend. Only 10% is given to ethos, so that's credibility. That's your qualifications, what university you went, how much time you spend in the industry, who you know, that kind of stuff. Only 25% is given to a lot of the facts, figures, and statistics. So that's the neocortex part of the brain that we spend far too much time worrying about. But 65% pathos, that's triggering emotion through narrative, getting your story across, and people wanting to talk to you and building trust. So I pose the question with industrial inkjet, what is the story? What is the story of digital print? Only 3% of all print is digital. It's ridiculous. It's so small. Such a big opportunity. And it's oriented around how we tell a story. because the technical stuff has been removed, largely, or the risk has been removed, and the possibilities are available. It's just an opportunity waiting to be had. So the InPrint show we've run now for since 2014, so yeah, that's 4 years already. The next one is in Milan, later this month, the 20th to the 22nd of November in Milan, and it's focused on industrial inkjet. It's about new markets, new technologies, new possibilities. It's really an amazing event. I love it because it's all about change and all about collaboration. It's great fun. And our next one is in Munich, and we have also one in the US, so that's my little advert. So I'm going to finish on the very end there with the question I started with. Is industrial inkjet crossing the chasm, or is it stuck somewhere in between, never to pop out? Well, I think it's crossing, but there is a level of impatience in the market. Secrecy is preventing this industry moving forward because we need to become better storytellers. And that epidemic, that change thing that I talked about, the tipping point, hasn't quite happened yet. Thank you for listening. And